And for the very latest on this, we're now being joined by Brahmachalani, live from New Delhi. He is a professor of strategic studies at the Center of Policy Research. Brahmachalani, thanks very much indeed for talking to WION this afternoon. Now, obviously, this is a lot that's going on between India and Canada at the moment, and the relationship certainly going south. Trudeau has accused Indian diplomats of actually backing a pattern of criminal harassment and violence against Canadians. How much of this do you think is Trudeau just trying to survive the political environment in his own country?
The domestic political factor is clearly prevalent in Trudeau's campaign against India. Trudeau is deeply unpopular in Canada. He's facing mounting pressure to resign. He now leads a government that doesn't even have the support of the New Democratic Party. So it's a minority government. Elections are not due until a year from now. So he's under a lot of pressure to quit. And maybe he's seeking to deflect attention from his problems at home by seeking to act tough against India. So that could be a possibility.
Right. That certainly could be a possibility. But if we were to talk about the wording of what the Canadian Prime Minister has said, this is unprecedented. I mean, the kind of public statements that are coming from the head of the government. I mean, obviously, a lot of this can happen in back channel conversations between the two sides. But the kind of allegations that are being put forward, obviously, we pulled out diplomats. What else can India do to make sure the rhetoric goes down?
Actually, the language from both governments has been unusually tough and harsh because if you look at the Indian government statement of yesterday, it personally targeted Trudeau and said that his actions were politically motivated, that he's being driven by vote bank politics, and that under his stewardship, Indian diplomats' safety cannot be ensured. So the Canadian government's own statement similarly used harsh language against India. And Trudeau, of course, has been making similar statements over the last 13 months. But he promised a year ago that he would place before Parliament, reveal to the Canadian public hard evidence about alleged Indian government involvement in the killing of Nijjar, who was a designated terrorist in India.
Yes.
And according to Canadian media investigations, especially by the Globe and Mail, which is the most respected newspaper of Canada, Nijjar had actually sent assassins to the Indian state of Punjab to carry out terrorist killings, and that he had been providing military training in arms in British Columbia, that he was linked with the group Khalistani Commando Force, which is a terrorist group not just in India, but it's been designated as a terrorist group by several Western governments. So, all that is not being revealed by the Canadian government to its own public, that this particular guy that the Canadian government was shielding for such a long time, this guy was actually he was quoted by Canadian intelligence as a Canadian intelligence asset. All that needs to be revealed by the Indian government, because I think India's public diplomacy has also been quite poor in bringing to light the actual involvement of Canadian government agencies in harboring deadly Sikh terrorists who have a record of not just glorifying violence, but against whom there are cases in India of perpetrating acts of terror.
Yeah, that's a very important point you're making there, Brahmachalani, that India needs to also up the ante in terms of telling the other side of the story. But if you were to compare this to what and how we are reacting to the so-called investigation asked by the US in the case of Panoon, where India is actually sending an investigation team. How do you compare the two situations?
See, in the case of the U.S. Allegation of a plot to murder another Sikh militant, Pannoon, who is based in New York and who also holds a Canadian passport, the Americans have provided, quote unquote, evidence to India. And given that fact, India is obligated to investigate that so-called evidence. So India was forced to set up an inquiry, and the inquiry has been doing its job. Whether it was one rogue element in India that actually sought to hire a hitman in the US, this is what the inquiry committee is supposed to investigate and reach a conclusion. But Canada has not shared any evidence with India. Not a shred of evidence has been shared with India. So unless Canada shares some evidence with India, how could India set up any kind of inquiry? That's the reason why there's this contrast between what India is doing in response to the American allegation and also the fact that India has refused to bite Canada's bait because no evidence has been shared with New Delhi by Canada.
Right, absolutely. Brahmachalani, thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon and sharing your thoughts on what's going on in that diplomatic relationship between India and Canada. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.